It was the story that had everyone around the world absolutely riveted as the Titan submersible went missing. And it also, I would say, had everyone around the world hoping for a happy outcome. We all know by now that that did not happen. Debris of the Titan has been recovered from the ocean floor. It is now with investigators in St. John's, and they will be working tirelessly, I'm sure, to try to determine why the sub imploded, presumably killing all 5 people on board. Captain Marc-ANDRÉ Poisson is former director of marine investigations at the Transportation Safety Board of Canada. He joins us now from St. Adèle. Thank you for your time today, Captain Poisson.
Oh, you're very welcome, Natasha. Welcome to you and Aaron. Yeah.
As we were all watching this sad story unfold, I found myself often wondering if experts like you kind of already knew the outcome. Did you already suspect that finding those 5 passengers alive was highly unlikely?
No, not at all. And actually, in my previous life too, I was a captain of a search and rescue vessel. So, no, we never. It crosses our mind like any other individual, but no, we always, like everyone else, we're hopeful, and we don't fall into hypothesis about their death until we found out that the unfortunate has happened.
That's somewhat reassuring somehow that like us who don't know the ins and outs, that you too were hoping for a happy outcome. What do we know about the Titan and how it was built?
Well, the investigators, because I have to speak on behalf of investigation, because that's my background. And so the investigators at this point, they probably have parts of the plan and how it was built, and they have the same pictures as everyone else had. So they don't know very much more at this point, besides any individual research that they would have done. It's gonna be part of the investigation to piece everything together, and specifically for the submersible in itself, because that's just one component of the investigation, which is being carried out by the U.S. Coast Guard. So the submersible in itself, until it's examined in the lab, and we won't. They won't have, the investigators, a full comprehension of how it was built and what went wrong.
Okay.
I wonder, when we were talking about the story and Natasha's point about from day to day, we were obviously hoping for the best, and yet kept hearing, the oxygen's going to run out. It's 96 hours. Then it was 72 hours. I'm wondering as well, because we found this out after the fact, and I know you're an investigating sort of in that capacity, but this submersible had been down to the Titanic before. On more than one occasion. And then all of a sudden something happens this one particular time. So when you hear this, what are you thinking? What's the difference this time from any other time? It's the same submersible. They've done this trip before. What do you suppose went wrong?
Yeah, well, that's exactly, every single accident, there's not a single point failure. There's multiple causes and contributing factors, and there's always a risk in the system. So essentially, it won't be treated, and it's not understood as any other disaster from a surface ship or an airplane or anything else. So, but the investigators at this point, like everyone else, know that the wreckage was found some distance from the Titanic that it was going to observe. So clearly, what needs to be done as well is gone from the Canadian ship, because there's 2 components on this in the transportation system. There's the Canadian ship itself, the polar print, and that's the impetus for Canada to investigate, because it's a Canadian ship that launched a submersible. So in this case, what you would want to know and examine also is when the submersible left the polar prints and was launched. What was its path towards? What was its path towards where it foundered and imploded at that point? So, had it already been to the Titanic and it was on its way up? Did it implode as it was going down, and so forth? So these are all mysteries. So it's not necessarily there's no hypothesis right now being carried on by any investigation team. And as you know, there's the RCMP investigating, there's the U.S., there's Canada, and potentially France as well.
What the fact that the pieces that have been retrieved, or at least what we've seen on the news, are these large pieces, the nose and a large panel. Firstly, it makes me wonder why it took so long to find them, but what does that tell us that these pieces were so big, Captain?
It doesn't tell an investigator much at this point. Because, well, you got to understand that the investigation team who's leading it, it's most likely a captain and probably a deputy investigators and engineer. But the investigation team is going to include scientists of different fields, engineers of different fields, and human factors specialists as well. So the lead investigators on this point can't draw any conclusions and wouldn't. What they would do is what's called in the scientific term is abductive reasoning, and they would be doing this with the engineers and the scientists back at the lab or back at a hangar, and that's making the abductive reasoning is making an educated guess on what may have happened. So, like you say, you got these big pieces and so forth, and you got other potential ideas, and you got what's made up of titanium, for example, and so then, by making the educated guess creating an hypothesis on what may went on, then the lab can test the equipment to confirm the hypothesis. So at this point, it's really too early. The investigators are not drawing any hypothesis. They have to wait to get back at the lab.
How do you feel about this kind of tourism?
Pardon me?
How do you feel about this kind of tourism? People paying millions of dollars.
Well, I don't have any particular opinion besides the fact that I'm much more comfortable on the water on a vessel than down below. So that would be my opinion.
Okay.
You brought up titanium, and one of the stories that began to emerge was the fact that the components to build this thing were not what you would call your standard components to take something down to the bottom of the ocean, right? We knew he was using graphite, titanium. A lot was made of the fact that he was using basically a joystick to navigate this thing, the kind you get in a video game. At the time, it was almost kind of laughed off. Look, we've done this before. It's perfectly okay. I wonder, too, this is not, if I decided to go to the bottom of the ocean tomorrow, look, at the Titanic, at the wreckage, and the vessel that I built, the submersible in this case, wasn't really up to what we call specs, I guess, would I be allowed to go? How is this allowed to happen if he didn't even get approval from the authority to go and do this in the first place?
Well, the first thing to answer your question, Aaron, is that this was in international waters, so there's actually no state specifically who's actually legislating the international waters. But that's why the Canadians are investigating this, because it's a Canadian ship. So a Canadian ship has obligations to conduct its operations either in Canadian waters or international waters, and one of these components and these obligations of Canadian ships is to have a safety management system on board, which includes operational procedures. So in this case, it would certainly be an interest of the investigation team. Did it include operational procedures on how to launch and retrieve a submersible? And if I was the head investigator, the director of investigation, that's certainly one component that I'd ask my investigators to focus on, because clearly if that was there, then there's probably some links on other legislation, links to potentially what the Americans do to certify submersibles and so forth. So right now it's a mystery, and that's what the next 2 years or so we're gonna find out is so what actually went on, and find out, like you say, is there something to be learned for private industry submersibles going down? And that, I think, is mostly going to be the Americans of finding out that component.
So just as a final question, you just said, I heard you say 2 years. My question was going to be, are we going to take weeks or months to actually ultimately determine what happened here, or much longer than that?
Well, the whole transportation system in itself, and when I talk about transportation system, I'm talking about a Canadian ship that left port with on board a submersible from a foreign state, and then conducted its work. That whole 2 years, which is the Transportation Safety Board investigating, that's going to make 2 years. And I don't think there's going to be any findings that are going to come up, but the Americans, by doing research in the laboratory, they may come up within a few weeks, a few months with some findings. And if they do come up, and it's important for the safety of the Americans and internationally, I'm pretty sure that the U.S. Coast Guard would publish these or let the public know. So that we don't know, but it's possible that something will come out earlier.
Just,
All right.
I want to squeeze one last question in, just because you mentioned that this is international waters. So ostensibly, somebody else could be attempting to do something like this right now as we speak.
Oh, I think all around the world, there's all sorts of. There's even remote shipping being done.
Okay.
So there's a lot of things going on in the water right now.
Interesting.
Captain Poisson, it's a story everyone got so wrapped up in. Of course, it ended tragically. Now we have to wait to find out if we can ever find out exactly what happened. I want to thank you so much for your insight. Appreciate your time today.
Yeah, you're very welcome, and have a great Canada.
Same
Day
to you.
weekend.
You too.
All right.